All right, everyone. Well, thank you for being here. Going to get a little sip of water before we start. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Even though I knew that this was the first talk of the new year, when I sat down to get YouTube streaming this morning and had to type in January 2016, it took me just a minute to stop and realize that, yes, indeed, another year has gone by. We have ridden a rock called planet Earth around the sun one more time. And in our culture and in our calendar, we use this as the beginning of the new year. Of course, other cultures and other calendars use different times and different events. But for us, it's the 1st of January. And it's interesting when we, in our culture, when we pass certain milestones, whether they be birthdays or anniversaries or the beginning of new calendar years, things like that, that they tend to be a time for reflection for us and a time for a decision for going forward. So we kind of look back at where we've been, we look at what we've done, we look at what we've accomplished, and we ask ourselves, well, did I get everything done last year that I wanted to get done? And somebody posted a funny meme on Facebook, and it said, in 2016, I firmly resolved to do everything that I firmly resolved to do in 2015 and never got around to doing. So we tend to do that. We tend to look back and say, well, what is it that I said that I wanted to do last year? What did I actually do? And what do I want to do this coming year? What do I want to achieve? Where do I want to be at the end of the 365 and a quarter days while this planet is going around the sun? What is it that I want to experience? What is it that I want to give? Where's the song in my heart that I want to sing? Where's the dance that I want to dance? Where's the love that I want to give? So we have all these times to reflect. I actually got out on New Year's Day and made it to the gym, and the parking lot was quite full, and everybody was in there. I don't know whether they were trying to sweat the alcohol out of their system from the night before, or they were just really dedicated to their New Year's resolutions that this is the year that they're going to get in shape, they're going to be fit. And of course, we've all been there, we've all done that, and it's very interesting to note that in our humanness, in our human resolutions, we quite often commit ourselves to do things, and then within a short time, a month or so goes by, and we're on to something else. We've kind of forgotten all about that. And of course, the gyms know this, and the greatest amount of sign-ups they have during the year is in right around the month of January. But if everybody who ever signed up for the gym showed up the same day at the same time, they wouldn't have enough space to fit everybody. So they kind of depend on people being overly enthusiastic. And what happens is once the enthusiasm of the commitment starts to wane, so does their ability to follow through. And I want to talk about it just a little bit. I want to talk about it in terms of motivation before we go into the spiritual aspect of it. Because that is part of the human experience. We tend to do that. And we wonder why. We wonder why it is. Whether it be in business, whether it be in our personal life, whether it be in our hobbies. Why is it that we seem to have this great desire to do something, and then we don't have the ability to follow through? There's a couple reasons for that. I just want to toss it out for your consideration, because today what we're talking about is your spiritual growth. Where do you want to be 365 days from today, when we get together in January of next year, when we stop to do our check-in and say, how have I grown this year? Have I made progress along the lines that I wanted to make progress? Do I really know and experience more of God than I did a year ago? where do I want to be at the end of the year? So one thing to consider is that the ability to do what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, the ability to follow through long after the enthusiasm of making the commitment has faded away, is called discipline. Discipline. Now, the word discipline comes from disciple, which really means, to be trained or to study. The disciple studied at the master's feet. But the best that I could find when I was exploring human motivation in my work in the business world was that the ability to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done is called discipline. And for many of us, discipline has a negative connotation, you see. For many of us growing up, discipline and punishment were one and the same thing. So I didn't learn as a child that discipline was the ability to do what needed to be done. I learned as a child that discipline was being punished. So if you didn't do your homework, if you went to school without homework, I went to a parochial school, you were disciplined. You were given some type of a punishment. It could be something as mundane as banging the erasers out the window after school, or cleaning the floors, or something like that. But the point is that discipline had a negative connotation. Discipline was punishment. And then later on in life, when you start to look at things, that you want to do, you find out, well, they require self-discipline. You want to exercise, you want to have an exercise program, you want to have a diet, and you want to lose weight or have a healthier body. All of these things require self-discipline. Well, if your name, today's talk is what's in a name, if your name for discipline, your idea of discipline is that discipline is punishment, then self-discipline is self-punishment. Gee, I'd like to do that, but in order to do that, I'd have to punish myself. I don't want to punish myself. So therefore, it never gets done. So I just kind of toss that out to show you how little definitions that we decide upon in life, little names that we give to things, little meanings that we assign to them, can literally have an effect in subtle ways for the rest of our lives. From time to time, we need to go back and explore that. We need to go back and ask ourselves, what ideas am I holding about life that may be preventing me from achieving the things that I say I want to do, that I think I want to do, but sometimes I just don't get around to doing them. The other thing, excuse me, that I learned about motivation and change is that any change that we want to undergo, whether it be to take up a new exercise program, a new diet, or a regimen of spiritual practice, which is what we're talking about today, there are certain things that kind of have to be overcome. If you think of it in terms of an equation where you're taught in mathematics that typically an equation, the two sides of the equation are balanced. One side equals the other side. But some equations are written so that one side is greater than the other side. So if you do all the math on one side, your answer should always be greater than the answer that's on the other side. And in order for us to be able to move and to change as human beings, there's an equation for change. And on the one side, you have to have the qualities on the one side of the equation, and they have to be greater than the qualities on the other. And the things that they have to be greater than are the cost, the loss, and the inertia. Now the cost is always a cost in terms of resources, time, money, those sorts of things. So you think you want to go to the gym and you want to work out, well, you got to pay $10 a month now to join the gym. Do you have $10 a month? Where's it going to come from? How about time? You have to get in a car, you have to drive there, you're going to spend time there, you're going to have to change into your work clothes, and you're going to have to get back in a car, and you're going to have to go to work, for example. So you have extra time that is going to take, and then energy. You have to have energy. There's a certain expenditure of energy that you have to have. And then there's the inertia. There's just getting started as human beings to try to just get going sometimes, to get that push to just get going is tough. And this is why in sales and marketing, you watch the commercials or you go into the showroom and look at a new car, there's always a sense of urgency that the salesperson is trying to convey, Well, I don't know how long this sale is going to last, but if you buy it today, you can get it for this price. Tomorrow it could be more. Or, on the TV, they say, get up, call in now. The first 50 callers are going to get this special deal. As if there's actually somebody at the other end counting to see if you're number 50 or not. But they do that to create this sense of urgency, to help you get started, to get past the inertia. And I think that coming around to an anniversary like New Year's Day is perhaps a way that our society in general, that we help each other kind of get past our inertia. Now is the time, this is when we're going to do our resolutions, this is the year that it's going to happen, and all those kind of things. Now on the other side of the equation, there are several factors that come into play, but the most important one that I want to talk about today is your desire. Your desire. How much do you want it? How much do you really want this change in your life? Do you understand what it would mean to have this change in your life? Do you really want it in excuse me, in terms of organizations, we used to call it the level of dissatisfaction with the status quo. If we're all content right where we are, if everything is just about where we want it to be, and there's no really pressing need for change, well, then why would we do that? Why would we do that? Now, if there's a problem that needs to be solved, if there's some sense of urgency, if in our lives, if suddenly we become sick, if suddenly we lose our job, if suddenly our finances are in trouble, all of these things, this is what you would call a whack on the side of the head. Suddenly there's this event in our lives that's telling us, this isn't the way that I thought it would be, this isn't the way that I wanted it to be, I need to do something now, I need to change now. There's dissatisfaction with the status quo. And that is a negative dissatisfaction with the status quo, which means we don't like the way things went, so now we're going to try to bring them back to where they were. Okay. There's another type of dissatisfaction with the status quo that says, wow, I know that there's a place, a state of consciousness, a way of being that is so much different, so much better than the one that I am experiencing now, that I want to experience that. It's this idea of paradise, if you will. There's this better way, there's this better place, there's this better state of being. And even though where I am is okay, even though there's nothing terribly going wrong in my life right now, I know that there's something so much better that I want to know what it is. I want to experience it. And if you look at this in the course of human history, people in general, people would rather stay where they are than to change to an unknown state. There's an old saying, the hell I know is better than the heaven I don't know. People would rather stay where they are than to go out and try something new and experience something new. And that's part of the inertia that we have to overcome. It's nothing new. Plato wrote about it in the Republic, of the people who were in the cave and they were bound so they couldn't see the world outside, and their only knowledge of life was what was in the cave. And the shadows on the wall they perceived to be reality. And one day one of them was able to break loose of the shackles and go outside and come back in and tell everybody there's a much better place out there. You don't understand. What you're seeing here is only a shadow of the reality. And the people didn't want to go, and they didn't want to believe that person. They thought that person was crazy. Had some kind of a vision. Something happened to their brain, you know. People do lots of things to avoid change. So the reason that I mention all of that is typically what we do in January is we come back to asking ourselves, have I grown this previous year? Have I grown in the ways that I wanted to grow? Have I grown to the degree that I wanted to grow? And what about next year? What is it that I want to do for next year? I think the most important thing we have to take away is that it is our responsibility and our accountability to do this, because there's no one else who can do it for us. The divine mind cannot do for you what it has created you to do for yourself. It can't and it won't. There are certain things that you must decide. And you must decide when it is time, and you must decide how much of your cost and your loss. The loss, by the way, is an emotional loss. If you change in some way, you're letting go of the past. And a lot of times people don't want to let go of the past, right? We all want to change. We want to be in this beautiful new way of being, but we want everything to stay the same. And it can't. We have to let go of the old if we are going to experience the new. So we have to bring ourselves around to a realization that you and I as individuals, as individualized expressions of God, we are the only ones who can make that decision for ourselves. And we are the only one who can demonstrate the follow-through, the discipline to do the things that need to be done in order to move in the direction that we want to move. So the earth goes around the sun once every 365 days. And from one perspective, we can say at the end of the year, everything is back exactly where it was a year ago. Or we can take a bigger picture and we can say, well, it's not exactly the same as it was a year ago. Because the sun is not in the same place within the galaxy that the sun was a year ago. And while the earth is orbiting the sun is moving through space. So while the earth is in the same position relative to the sun that it was a year ago, the earth and the sun together are in a totally different position within the galaxy than we were a year ago. And not only was the sun moving within the galaxy, but the galaxy is moving within the universe. So on the one hand, we can say we are right back where we were a year ago. Or we are in a totally different place than we were a year ago, but we are starting another cycle of our growth. What I have learned is as we grow spiritually, sometimes we think, well, I've had a crisis in my life, in some area of my life, and I've used spiritual principle and prayer, and I've grown beyond that. And I never have to address that again. And what tends to happen is we do have to address it again, but at a different level, at a different level. We don't come across the same obstacles that we found last year, but we may find different obstacles, different ideas in consciousness that are related to the same issue. So I relate it to flying the sailplane when I was flying sailplanes. The way that a sailplane goes up is you find the pilot finds a rising column of air called a thermal. Now you can see these on a beautiful summer day. You see the little white puffy clouds everywhere. Excuse me. And they mark columns of rising air. As the air rises up, eventually, as it rises up, the air gets cooler. And eventually, the air gets cool enough that the moisture that's in the air condenses out and forms a cloud. And so you get to see the cumulus clouds. So what a sailplane pilot tries to do is to find one of these rising columns of air with different techniques that we're taught. And once you get in it, you bank the airplane over and you make a circle, a very tight circle. So from one perspective, it looks like you're just flying in a circle. You're going around and around and around and around in a circle. But if somebody was standing on the ground looking at you, they would observe that every time you make a circle, you're going up a little bit. You're spiraling upward. You're going up and you're going up and you're going up. So while it's true, excuse me, while it's true that you may have been, at this particular point of the circle before, you're at a different altitude than you were before. So we want to consider then that our spiritual growth is a spiral, is an upward spiral. And we come around to certain points in the year where we reflect on where we've been and where we want to go. Excuse me. And we can accept the fact that we may in fact work through some similar issues to ones that we worked through in the past, but that we're working through them at a different level. And what we want to know is that eventually we'll run out of things to work through. Eventually we will get to the point where we're no longer trying to solve problems, but what we're doing is we are trying to express and celebrate the life that is within us. Now I mention all of those because what we do every January is we do something called Going Back to the Basics. Now this is a copy of the Science of Mind textbook. This is an older cover. It's a solid blue, so you can't really see anything. The book jacket is gone. But every year we go back to the basics. We go back to the first 4 chapters, which are the introduction of the Science of Mind textbook. And in the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes in these 4 chapters kind of lays the foundation for everything else that he's going to cover. So it's important for us to go back to the first 4 and ask ourselves, do I have the same ideas this year that I had last year? Has anything new occurred to me? Is my consciousness evolving, or different paragraphs and different sentences in the chapter, are they speaking to me louder than they did last year? Are there different ideas that are coming to me? Maybe these are the ideas that this year I am ready to move forward with. Okay? So I've been doing this since at least the early 90s, reading these same 4 chapters every January. And every January I get something entirely different out of them. And what I got this year, I want to start with, this is just in a flyleaf of the book, is this little dedication that Ernest Holmes wrote. And he said, these lessons are dedicated to that truth, with a capital T, which frees man from himself and sets him on a pathway of a new experience, which enables him to see through the mist to the eternal and the changeless reality. These lessons are dedicated to that truth which frees man from himself and sets him on the pathway of a new experience, which enables him to see through the mist to the eternal and the changeless reality. Now, what we want to talk about here, the title is, What's in a Name? And Ernest at the very beginning says, these ideas that free man from himself, free humanity from itself, free all persons from themselves. But there's an indication there, or an implication, an assertion that we, you and I, that we are somehow holding ourselves in bondage. And that we, you and I, are the only ones who are able and accountable and responsible for freeing ourselves from this bondage. And the path that he lays out for us in this book are lessons. Lessons. That is, there's something to learn. Remember, we're told in Scripture, the truth shall make you free. And here he lays out for us his dedication to that truth. That truth which frees man from himself. That truth which sets us free and sets us on the pathway of new experience. Which enables us to see through the mist. To see the eternal. To see the changeless reality. So this comes back to what's in a name. What's in a name? Emmett Fox tells us that the second commandment tells us, you shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And what Emmett Fox tells us is that the commandments, wherever the commandments say shall not, we should interpret that as cannot. That according to Emmett Fox, that the commandments are telling us that there are some immutable laws of the universe, some things that we just absolutely cannot do. And therefore we shouldn't waste our time trying them. And one of the things that we cannot do is to take the name of God in vain. Now, when I was a kid growing up, of course that meant cussing, you know. You're not supposed to cuss, it's just not good to cuss. That was taking the name of God in vain. But Emmett gives us a different interpretation to that. And what he's saying is that whatever your name for God is, whatever your idea, your concept, whatever your mental image that you have put this label on, this name, whatever that is, that lays the course, sets the direction for the rest of your life. The rest of your life. Now you have to understand the underlying premise. The underlying premise is that we live in a spiritual universe in which it is done unto us according to our belief. As Dr. Holmes will tell us in this chapter, you might think of yourself as a little bubble of conscious awareness surrounded by an ocean of subjective law. Imagine, kind of think of the Jacques Cousteau in his little submarine, and he's going down into the ocean. And here in this little capsule, is conscious awareness. But the medium that the conscious awareness is surrounded by is a creative medium. It is not, inert. That we are surrounded by subjective mind, subconscious mind. We are surrounded by something that responds to us according to our belief. So Emmett Fox says, if you consider then that you have this belief about what God is and how God works, and you've taken those beliefs and you've kind of wrapped them up and you've put a name to them and attached that name to them, since it is done to you according to your belief, then the rest of your life, everything in your life, is a reflection of that. And that is because our belief about God, our ideas about God, are the deepest beliefs that we hold. They're kind of like the underpinning value of everything else that we do in life. And you can look at what's going on in the world today. You can look at what's going on in your own life today. You can look at people in different cultures who have different ideas about what God is. And you can see, you can see that the way they behave, the things that they do, the way that they speak are a reflection of their deepest held beliefs about God. And we even see that we as human beings murder one another over our ideas of God. You see this. People are saying, well, if you don't believe in the same God that I believe in, then you're evil. And we need to eliminate you. And this is nothing new. This has been going on for as long as we have recorded history. People have been killing each other in the name of their God. An idea that they hold. So, because the idea that we hold about God, the name that we have for God, is the most important idea in our life because it sets the groundwork for everything else that happens, then it's important that at least once a year we come together and ask ourselves, well, what do I mean? What is my word for God? Some people don't even like the word God. They can't use the word God. It has such a negative connotation to them in the way that they were brought up and the way that they've seen other people use it, that they can't even utter the word. They have to use something else. Some people refer to God as the Father, and yet other people find that word offensive. They can't conceive that God is a Father. It doesn't quite do it for them. Some people speak of God as Mother, and other people can't see that. Some people speak of God as Mother, Father, God. Some people speak of God as the divine, some as love, some as spirit, some as nature. What is your name for God? Now, it doesn't matter to the divine, as I typically use God or the divine. It doesn't matter to it. This is why Ernest labeled the chapter The Thing Itself. He's challenging us to think about, what do you mean by this? What is it you're talking about? And it doesn't matter to the thing itself what you call it. It is totally unaffected by what we call it. But we are completely affected by what we call it. If we think that it is some type of a power that holds us in bondage, that punishes us for our mistakes, that judges us and will condemn us for all eternity if we don't behave in a manner that it is pleasing to it. If we think that unless we bring it certain sacrifices, of flesh sacrifices, burnt flesh, make our offerings in a certain way, go to a certain building a certain number of times a year, all of these other things that are built into our religions, if we believe those to be true, then that determines the rest of our life. And what Ernest is asking us to consider is that which has created us out of itself, first of all, there's this underlying energy, there's this underlying stuff, there's this underlying intelligence called mind. And now he said by mind we mean consciousness, not the brain, consciousness. That's what we mean by mind. And thought is a movement within mind. And that when this thing creates, it creates by a thought, a movement within its own consciousness. And something that is part of it acts upon that thought, acts upon that movement, acts upon that statement or declaration, and creates the perfect outpicturing. The perfect physical outpicturing. The physical equivalent of the mental equivalent. So in our culture, this is represented to us in the book of Genesis, where Spirit said, "Let there be light," and there was light. "And let there be stars and planets, and suns and moons," and there were. a movement within thought, set in motion an immutable law that produced the results. Now, Dr. Holmes asks us to consider how this thing, if it's creating us all out of itself, how this thing could wish us bondage. And it couldn't. That which is perfect cannot know imperfection. The light cannot know darkness, is the way that the philosophers would put it. The divine has created us out of itself, and it knows us as itself. And it could not know us as anything other than itself. It has no sense of self and otherness. So when it sees us, it sees not our sins and our iniquities. It sees us not as worms in the dust, but rather as an individualized expression of its own life. It sees us as it sees itself, expressing, experiencing, and enjoying. So Ernest Holmes says to think that God would create us and put us in bondage is to dishonor the thing itself. It couldn't do that because it couldn't do that to itself. Excuse me. But to think that it could create us and not leave us alone to make that discovery is also an impossibility. Because we have to be unique. We have to be individualized. If we were created fully enlightened, we would not be individualized. We would all be little robots or automatons, as he calls it. So there's this thing, and this thing creates, and it creates by a movement of thought. And this movement of thought is then acted upon by part of itself. And that part of itself that we call the law then does whatever needs to be done in order to bring about the demonstration. And we are created in that image and that likeness. And we have been left alone to make this great discovery. And that's why we have to come back from time to time and ask ourselves, what is my name for this thing? What is my idea of this thing? Is my idea that it is mean and punishing? Is my idea that it is kind and loving? What is my idea, and what is my relationship to it? And in this first chapter, what Ernest is trying to do, I believe, is to set the groundwork for the rest of the year, but to let us know that what we're doing is perfectly normal, it is perfectly natural, there's nothing superstitious about it. He starts the chapter by saying, we look forward to the day when religion and science shall walk hand in hand from the visible into the invisible. And he doesn't argue with scientists. He says, let's see what they found. Let's consider ourselves scientists, because what we are trying to do, excuse me, is we are trying to use a systematic approach to discovering more of God. All of science is based on something that is invisible. The thing, we would call it. There's something there. We don't know what it is, but we're investigating, and we're working our way back and back and back through a specific method, through specific procedures. We have these big colliders over in Europe that accelerate particles around and slam them into one another. And they observe the results, and hopefully that can take us back closer to the beginning of the universe. But you have to consider, if you ever watch the if you ever watch the physicists in a discussion, it just fascinates me, and their minds work in a direction that I can't even comprehend, because the math just escapes me when they start talking about these things. But I was watching one lecture one time, and the physicist said, you have to consider that when we get to the moment of the Big Bang, when we get to the moment of the Big Bang, which they're trying to work their way back to, then all of our science no longer works. Intellect and reason don't work. Science doesn't work. Weighing and measuring doesn't work. Observing things and trying to replicate them doesn't work, because it is so far beyond the realm of what we are capable of knowing with the set of rules that we have at this time, that we have no way to explore it. And then the big question is okay, well, what happened before the Big Bang? You know, as the physicists would say, well, what kicked the can? He says, we would have no way of knowing that. Through the scientific method, we would have no way of knowing that. It happened. They think it happened. We're here. But logic and reason and scientific method can't take us back there. So we have to consider then, at that point, when Ernest is saying that religion and science walk hand in hand from the visible to the invisible, that we're all trying to get back to this understanding of what is the thing. What is the thing that is there? What is the thing that kicked the can? What is the thing that got it all started? What is the thing that set the creative process in motion? What is the thing that is the creative process? What is the thing that creates all other things out of itself? Now, these are deep questions for us to ponder. And I ask you to consider the importance of it. Right? One of the things that I said helps us to have the motivation to change is this desire, this dissatisfaction with the status quo. What we must consider is that if our name for the divine, if our idea of God is truly that it has created us out of itself, and it has left us alone to make that discovery, then whatever bondage we find ourselves in, wherever we find ourselves experiencing a lack of freedom, then the only reason for it is our beliefs, is our thoughts. That there's something within us, we may not be consciously aware of it, but there's something within us that holds an erroneous idea of who we are and what God is. And that is what's limiting our experience. And the way that we move through those limiting ideas is through our dedication, through our commitment to our practice, our spiritual practice, to our lessons, to reading our books, to listening to our lectures, to thinking, to meditating, and most importantly, particularly at the beginning, is to deliberately find a process by which we can deliberately change our beliefs and watch this power in action about us. So if the whole premise then is that we are this little bubble of conscious awareness surrounded by a subjective field that responds to us according to our belief, right? That is monitoring our beliefs and is producing in our experience the perfect outpicturing of what we believe. If that is the working premise that we have, if we were scientists and we had this working premise, how would we prove it to be true? And the only way that we know that we can prove it to be true is to try to use it, to observe, to find an area of our life that we want to change, and to very deliberately go in and change our beliefs, and to watch the results in our life. Now we will experience the results, we will see that things change, but we won't know how did that happen. And Dr. Holmes tells us that this is no different than any other scientific principle as we're discovering it. I could take a ball and hold it out in my hand and I can drop it and it will bounce onto the floor. And anybody who does that will have the ball bounce onto the floor. Now how does it do that? We say, that's gravity. Gravity does that. What is gravity? How does gravity work? Now Newton described it for us in a mathematical formula. And Einstein came along later and said, well, that's all well and good, but that's not how gravity works at all. Gravity is an illusion caused by the fact that space-time is warped. And we look at that and go, what? So there's this thing called gravity and it works and we can demonstrate that it works, but we don't know how it works and we don't know why it works. And what Dr. Holmes is asking us to consider is that we need no more faith than that to begin our exploration of this power that responds to us according to our belief. The thing itself is expressing itself in our lives according to our belief. And that's what we're going to talk about for these next few weeks. That's what we're going to talk about in one way, shape, or form for the rest of the year. But what I ask you to consider, today, what I ask you to consider on this first Sunday of 2016 is, what is your intention for your spiritual growth for this year? Spiritually, where do you want to be when we get together in January of next year? Where do you want to be spiritually? How much more of God do you want to know? How much more of deliberately, consciously experimenting with this law of mind to demonstrate its presence, right? That's what the demonstration means. We're demonstrating the activity of the law of mind. And as we do that, as we demonstrate it, just like the physicist who is working back towards the Big Bang and says, but the closer I get to the Big Bang, the more I realize that once I get there, I won't be able to know. And then if you ask me to go back even further beyond that, I have no way of knowing. Because nothing that would be there would be like anything I've ever seen, weighed, measured, touched, or felt. That as we experiment with our own thoughts, with our own beliefs, and we allow this power to act upon them, and we see the changes in our own lives, and what we are doing is moving ourselves back to that great mystery, back to the thing itself. So what we are invited to do this year, I ask you, if you don't have a copy of the Science of Mind textbook, get one. You can get them used on the internet for just a couple bucks plus shipping. You can find the 1926 version available in PDF format for free to download. It's very similar, and at least it'll get you started until you can get a hard copy of the full textbook. But I invite you to get a copy of the textbook and read this. Just read this first chapter this week. Just read the thing itself. And read it several times. And take the ideas that speak to you. Take the ideas that jump out at you. And sit with them. Sit in quiet meditation with them and ask, what is it that this means? What is it that this is trying to tell me? How is this going to help me grow this year as I come into a deeper realization of God? And are we willing to understand that what we need is we need the discipline? Not a punishment, but we need a training. We need the ability to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. We need to take the time for our spiritual practice. We need to invest the energy into our spiritual practice. And we need to overcome the inertia, whatever comfortable ways we have fallen into over the past year. We need to be willing to shake those up so that we can get started on this great adventure. Now I'm going to read one more time the dedication of the book, and I want this to be our closing treatment as well, because I think these few sentences are so powerful that they are really asking us, is this what you want to experience in your life this year? Is this what you want to do with the time that you have riding this rock around the sun this year? These lessons are dedicated to that truth which frees man from himself and sets him on the pathway of a new experience, which enables him to see through the mist to the eternal and changeless reality. The world in which we live has pretty much been doing the same things for as long as we have recorded history. We've been getting more effective and more efficient at them, but we have pretty much been doing the same things. Now is the year, I suggest, now is the year for you and I to break out of that cycle more completely than we did last year, more completely than we did the year before. Now is the year for us to step out of the belief in our limiting humanness and grow into the belief of our unlimited spiritual nature. That's what casts off the shackles that have bound us. That's what sets us free on the pathway of a new adventure. An adventure of not seeing things and believing in things as they are, which is only an outpicturing of consciousness, but an adventure in seeing things as the divine sees them. A willingness to see that truth. I believe that we have come here to this earth at this time and incarnated in these bodies because this is the perfect way for us to discover more of God at our current level of consciousness. And if that is our purpose for being here, then I invite you to consider your willingness to commit, to dedicate yourself in this year of 2016 to allowing a deeper understanding of the thing itself, what it is, of your relationship to it, of your relationship with it, and of this magnificent adventure that we call life. I believe that the divine has created each and every one of us out of itself as an individualized expression of itself. And I invite you to consider this year if this is a year in which you wish to express and experience to a greater degree the activity of the divine in you, as you, and through you. And I hope it is. And I invite you to join us next week for some more ideas on how we can do this together through 2016. And so it is.